Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Furman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Amazon Podcast Network. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and racing analyst, Chris Wormy. And Wormser, I got a beef and a bone to pick with you before we even get into some NASCAR stuff.
Great.
So you don't know where I'm going with this, so I'm going to catch you by surprise. So I get a very nice thank you note in the mail from you and your lovely wife for the gift that we gave you when you guys tied the knot, thankfully outside of NASCAR season. I get a beautiful picture of everybody in the wedding party. I'm nowhere to be found. I must have been standing behind you when the picture was taken, or you conveniently edited me out. I feel cheated that I wasn't prominently featured there. And once again, further supports you actually believe what you say. I have a face better for radio and podcasting than I do for
Yeah, you know
TV
what? That
and
wasn't
video.
even me. That was Jenna. She said, you know what? We can't have Todd in this picture. And so she did all the editing herself. No, I don't know. I didn't even realize you weren't in the picture there.
Unbelievable. I'm looking at this thing. You know, my better half is poking around. She goes, I don't think you're in the picture. And she goes, nope, I can see you. You're right in the middle of Worm and Jenna in the back because I can see what looks to be your suit jacket. So I know my place more often than not, and I'm perfectly fine.
You want a funny
accepting all
story about that is we initially thought that the card or the very generous gift that you had given us was from someone else, and I'm like, no, we're not. I go, we're not accepting this. Are you kidding me? And she goes, oh no, it's from Todd. I go, oh, well, we're cashing that shit for sure then.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad the check for $8.78 didn't bounce, and it was all going to be predicated on your NASCAR performance this season, above all else. But we obviously have a lot of ground to cover. For those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, Stage 1, all about what we've seen last week and a storyline that broke after we recorded last week that I think is worth us touching on because it'll have major ramifications, or potentially can, on the season-long pricing to win the 2023 NASCAR Series Championship. Stage 2, an interview with Brian Murphy that I think a lot of folks are going to enjoy. Murph, one of the better follows on Twitter in the NASCAR community, open and willing to answer any questions that you have about the space. So we tried to peel back the curtain about the new downforce package that'll be unveiled at Phoenix and get his general thoughts about the state of NASCAR and what we've seen so far this season. And of course, Stage 3, where we'll deep dive the race that is essentially your home track at Phoenix International Raceway this weekend. But where my note was profitable for us Sunday, unfortunately, we couldn't get the top 10 on Ryan Blaney home that we gave out in the Stay Green podcast. Thankfully, the matchup, a relative rocking chair with Eric Almirola finishing on the lead lap. Ricky Stenhouse, I think, is still trying to cross the finish line somewhere north of Las Vegas at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. But I have to ask, sometimes we can confuse a variety of things. As bettors, we go, yeah, it was a good race because it was profitable for us. But I have to ask you, as a NASCAR fan, separate your betting portfolio from everything else. Did you feel that was a good racing product that we saw on display in the Pennzoil 400?
Okay, so if you wanted drama, you did get it towards the end, but I would say that the meat of the race was fairly boring. I mean, if there weren't cautions or stage breaks, I think we see, Byron get out to like a 5 or 6 second lead and just kind of a snoozer. I think that there were a lot of people that were upset about the Almirola caution. Obviously we were, because Blaney was running 10th at that point. But, whether it was a caution or not, I don't know. Like, everything that happens with a sport, I kind of have to look at it through the lens as, safety first, but also how do we make money from it? And if there's going to be a caution late, okay, if we're still, doing the live betting thing, okay, how do I make money from this? And, you can't really control when they're going to throw the caution or not. I think you're wasting energy if you're angry or not angry or whatever when they throw the caution. I've just learned that you never know when it's going to come out. So, but from a racing standpoint, I do The one thing I did like about this race, I do think that the two best cars were racing for the win at the end. And I always like seeing good cars that were set up well. These crews spend a lot of time, as we talk to Brian Murphy, and you're going to see how much he knows about the sport and everything that goes into it. These guys spend a lot of time and effort trying to set up these good cars, and it still takes an element of luck to get them to victory lane. It's not just a foregone conclusion if you're the fastest car. So I did like the fact that the two fastest cars were kind of racing for the win. But yeah, I could see how it would be a little boring, in those middle 150 laps or so.
Well, I mean, what we saw in that quote-unquote boring race was HMS dominance. Third time Hendrick Motorsports has finished 1, 2, 3 in a Cup Series event. Quick work by William Byron's pit crew, enabled to 24 to get out front, beating Kyle Larson off pit road for that overtime restart, which ultimately led to the lead. Leaders all took 2 tires, and Larson just flat out won the race. Ends up leading 176 laps. Obviously, we saw those two cars really distance themselves from everybody else. Alex Bowman a distant third, but more importantly for the fan of Hendrick Motorsports and NASCAR in general, one of their teammates was unable to race, and that, of course, was Chase Elliott. More information has come out about his unfortunate snowboarding incident that kept him off the track on Sunday. Looks like he's going to miss 6 weeks in total, but I'm not here to talk about drivers, the choices they make off the track versus the commitment on the team. I've never been behind the wheel of a car. I will never be behind the wheel of a car. There's great perspective on that particular topic that are better equipped to discuss than you and I. But where they're not better equipped to discuss is what Chase's absence means to the way that we should be looking at the odds to win the championship this season, because Chase came into the year as the favorite. He now has a chance. He will be granted a waiver. I'd be stunned if NASCAR didn't do that. But what's working against him is the potential accumulation of playoff points, and we've seen how important those are since NASCAR has gone to this format back in 2012, 2013, compared to the overall body of work. So when you're looking at the full season composite odds now, we've seen Chase's price drift out, some books as far as 10-1. Does it create value elsewhere that you think is worth scooping up, adding to the portfolio if we have Kyle Busch at 15-1 that we encouraged all of our Stay Green listeners to bet on our preview podcast?
Well, I think that there's two parts to this. There's one, just Chase not being able to, pick up stage points and playoff points. Those are important. I mean, you get down to the final 8 and every spot matters. And if you track all of those points back throughout the season, that's a spot here and there or a stage finish here and there throughout the season. So obviously that's going to be important. And I know that it's just a few points, but man, we've seen some of the craziest finishes and people moving on by, Kyle Larson at the Roval like 3 or 4 years ago, with like missing a wheel crossing the finish line and getting in. So I do think that he just puts himself more in that I have to win box. And listen, he can do that. When he won his first championship or his only championship, he did have to win at Martinsville to get in at Phoenix, and then he had to win at Phoenix. So I still think that it's very important that you have to win. I mean, if you look at Logano last year, Logano wins the first race in the round of 8. He gets to concentrate for 2 weeks on the Phoenix race, the championship race, and he goes on and wins that championship. So winning will still be a part of getting to the Final Four. It's how well does he run, or how well does he need to run in the round of 16 and the round of 12 in order to kind of continue moving on. So the other thing from an odds perspective that I want to address is it also depends on how many wins some of these other drivers get. There are some drivers that if they go on a tear, like if Kyle Larson wins, let's just say he wins 3 out of the next 5 races, which could happen. I'm not saying that will happen, but it could happen.
Yep.
Well, his odds are going to plummet massively, in which case there's no reason to get involved with Chase until we know he's coming back. Because if Kyle Busch, who already has a win, or even William Byron, who already has a win, or Kyle Larson, who looks like he's going to be really fast on 1.5 miles this year. If those guys go on to win races, I think you're going to see Chase's price float a little bit, and you're going to see those guys drop. And so it's just, at this point in the season, I would not be rushing to bet Chase if you think that Chase's 10-1 is a good value. I disagree. Let's just wait and see what happens the next 6 weeks. And more importantly, let's get him healthy and let's get him back on the track. It's important to NASCAR that he's out there.
So you have a better memory than I do, and the only parallel that I can create here would be when Kyle Busch broke his leg on track. Do you remember how far out his odds to win the championship drifted? Because I know there was a lot more uncertainty about him even getting the waiver and if there was a chance that he was going to get back into the postseason. But I want to say I saw upwards of 40 or 50 to 1, but I could be talking out of my ass here.
Yeah,
so I defer to you
I don't
there.
remember specifically, but I remember it was 2015. At least I think I remember it was 2015. I don't remember what he drifted out to.
Because that's I was going to say the one thing, and I guess the follow-up, and you don't have to obviously tip your hand on this, knowing that there are a lot of odds makers in the community that are listening. I mean, does Chase Elliott become a buy at 18 to 1? Does he become a buy at 20 to 1? I don't think he's going to get out there, but we obviously have a price in the back of our head. So if any odds makers are listening, if you want to drop Chase to 50 to 1, I'm happy to give you a courtesy bet at that price for him to win the championship.
Yeah, if he's that cheap, yeah, I would be interested there. But I think it has more to, I think at this point, it has more to do with what other drivers, what their results are over the next 6 weeks than what Chase does. I think that if we get a couple random wins, let's say Truex wins, Bowman wins, Reddick wins, Denny wins, Chris Bell wins, and Blaney wins. Well, I think that maybe that 10 to 1 is probably a decent price because there's still going to be that super competitive environment where we're not quite sure who the best car is, which is kind of where we're sitting last year. But I'll tell you what, if any driver, and it doesn't matter who it is, I'm not just saying that, my bias towards Kyle Busch, I'd love to see him win, 5 races in a row. But I think if you do see some...
Yeah, 5 races in a row in the playoffs. I don't care if he wins another race during the regular season. Save those for when they matter most.
I just think
number
it
8.
depends on what other drivers do. If we do see someone go on a tear, I think if Kyle Larson goes out there and has a really good showing here at Phoenix, he should be the favorite because he showed a lot of speed last week. And if that speed transfers over from Chevy, from a 1.5-mile track to this short track with this reduced downforce, you're going to see... I think you'll see a better price on Chase.
Makes a ton of sense, and we'll obviously have plenty of time to dissect that over the coming weeks. We know that Josh Berry is going to run the ovals and intermediate tracks for that number 9 team, and it looks like Jordan Taylor will finally get a crack as he's been designated to run the road course at COTA, which will create hopefully some interesting betting opportunities. But we teased the interview with Brian Murphy, the associate shop foreman of Stewart-Haas Racing, at the top of the show, and without further ado, we may as well welcome our second guest of the season into the Stay Green family. Thrilled to welcome in a friend of the program, associate shop foreman from Stewart-Haas Racing. You, of course, can follow Brian Murphy on Twitter. That's at Brian, BRIAN _ Murphy, MURPHY _ Murph. I know we set the bar pretty high around these parts for Stay Green. Can't thank you enough for jumping into the fold today.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys, calling and having me come on. Always excited to talk about motorsports. So definitely going to be a real treat. Thanks again.
Well, we're not going to give you all the low-hanging fruit and just talk motorsports. I know you're a diehard Packers fan, and we obviously are a football podcast around these parts. Have you come to grips with the fact that Aaron Rodgers may not be the starting quarterback for your beloved Packers, and you're going to finally have to usher in the Jordan Love era up there in northern Wisconsin?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, I think the last couple of years have been a little touch and go at this time. And I'm fine with whatever. We've been pretty spoiled to have Aaron as long as we've had. We've had some great seasons. I'm honestly just fine with whatever both parties choose. So whether it be Aaron Rodgers or Jordan Love, just really excited to see my Packers get back on the field and hopefully turn things around from where they were this year. Because, man, I remember sending you, I think my wins and losses, what I thought they were going to get about this time last year, and boy, was I off. I think it was a 12 and 5 or whatever it was. Definitely missed that one for sure.
Worm, it broke my heart. Murph sends me a note. He goes, how are my Packers going to do this year? And I go, I think there's some regression that's finally coming. So optimistic, 12-5, NFC North champions. And here they are fighting tooth and nail to get into the postseason week 18. And we know how that game ended. I feel like I should know this by now, Worm, we talk NASCAR, obviously the majority of the time, but football. Are you a Lions fan by default growing up in Michigan, or did that bug never really infect you the same way that everything else did?
No, I'm a Lions fan, but it's strictly by default. If you were to ask me anything about Lions football, I might expose my tiny little brain, and so maybe don't do that. But yeah, I mean, my old man's a Lions fan and Michigan football fan. So, but ultimately, I'm all about racing. So, but I'll tell you what, you need to Murph, you need to kind of let him know your setup at Lambeau. Like, Todd, have you heard this?
Oh, he gave me the full rundown, and I'm not sure that I should share it in this kind of public forum here because he's going to have people banging down his doors to try and stay with the Murph family, tap into the proper attire to deal with cold weather and everything else that goes along with it. I'm convinced his family represents 97% of the season ticket holders at Lambeau Field, and that's how firmly entrenched they are in Lombardi Way up there in Green Bay.
Yeah, it's been something special for sure. I get to sit in the two seats that my grandparents had purchased for season tickets when the stadium opened originally. So since then, they've added about 20 tickets. So I am as spoiled as can be, can sit wherever I want throughout the stadium, whether it be front row, 50-yard line. It's really special. It's really cool. My family is diehard Packer fans, just like maybe you and me, Chris, we're diehard racing fans. They bleed that green and gold, and it's always fun to go see my family, go to a game, do some tailgating. Funny thing, even after all these decades, my grandparents have passed, and we still meet in front of my grandparents' house that we sold probably 5 or 6, 7 years ago. We still meet in front of their house and take the game day picture on that porch every game. So the tradition runs deep, and it's just so special. Always love bringing fans of any kind, whether it be Packers or I married Bears fans, so it's an interesting relationship there for sure. But I think Lambeau is definitely one of the most friendly places you can visit in professional sports. So we need to plan a trip this year and get you guys out there. Definitely make it a cold one. We got plenty of gear, so don't shy away from that snow and the cold.
We'll have to see what we can put together. Worst comes to worst, we'll start a grassroots campaign that instead of the clash at the Coliseum, we'll get the clash at Lambeau Field and try and bring some motor racing right up there to the lifeblood of the National Football League. I know Chris has a ton of questions for you, Murph, in terms of aerodynamics and everything that we're going to expect from an on-track racing product this weekend. But before we get there, the first question that I have, how much more challenging is it for all of you guys in and around the sport when we talk about this West Coast swing? We know we're going into Phoenix after the 2-mile track at Fontana, the 1.5 we saw at Vegas. But in terms of getting everybody on the same page, we've heard some of the stories about haulers getting stuck, dealing with weather, making sure the right cars are out there, because we know the demands at each one of these tracks are so unique compared to some of the challenges that you guys face when we get back to the cradle of NASCAR and we're working through Virginia, we're working through Atlanta, we're working through North Carolina, where there are a lot more tracks in close proximity to one another.
Yeah, I think the one of the most difficult parts of the West Coast swing, especially nowadays, is just the lack of chassis. NASCAR has reduced the chassis allotment to 7 per car number, and because of a lot of the safety upgrades over the off season, we only have 4 or 5 per team right now. So when you throw in the Clash, the Daytona 500, having a backup to go from track to track, you really are limited on, the car counts, and getting those cars turned around efficiently, quickly, and assembled in a way that maximizes performance depending on which track you're going to, whether it be a intermediate or a short track. It takes time, and to do that in a way that can win cup races, requires you to really, we say a lot, ready, shoot, aim. So you got to hit it. You got to hit it right away. You just got to know. And the logistics of getting these cars 2,000 miles out west is difficult as well. To get all these trucks and cars out west safely, and then quickly. We send a 5-car hauler out there to pick up the race cars, come all the way back to Kannapolis, North Carolina, and they have 3 hours to turn that truck around, get back in the truck, and head back west to meet the primary haulers at the next racetrack. So yeah, a lot of logistics, a lot of difficulty. These road crews, man, they are just beat to death right now. Flying overnight, getting back to the shop, because their job really is finishing the cars, putting their hands on their parts and pieces to make sure that they are ready to run either 500 miles or whatever it may be with these long cup races. So Yeah, 3 different tracks, a lot of traveling, a lot of time, and low car counts. It's for sure a challenge, but only one more to go, really.
Yeah, I have a question. So, we have some high level conversations, and I get so confused. You might as well be speaking another language when you're talking about some of the changes that you can make to race cars, and we'll get to the downforce changes that we're going to have this week. But if you could just kind of let the listeners know how different the car setups are from week to week. Like the same car setup from Fontana does not necessarily, or well, certainly from the Clash, right? You have a half mile track, and then you go all the way back to Daytona, then you go to Fontana, then to Vegas, and to Phoenix. Like, how much different are you setting up those cars week to week? I guess, don't get too specific.
Yeah, Murph, you
but maybe
can
just
talk to us like we're 5 years old here. Remember?
Yeah, exactly. Like we're kindergartners.
First and foremost, and we're trying to convert a lot of our loyal Bet the Board listeners into consumers of the Stay Green product, and we can't basically hit them over a mallet with physics and some of the aerodynamics and mechanics that come into making good, positive EV bets.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many options, especially with this next gen car. Believe it or not, a lot of people think it's a spec'd out chassis, but the amount of options you have to mount suspension pieces, the amount of options you have when it comes to shock settings. These shocks have they're 5-way adjustable. They have 50 adjustments per adjustment. So the available options just on the shock side are really limitless. And then aerodynamically, we get plus or minus 150 thousandths off of the gold surface that NASCAR gives us. So there is a lot of room for maximizing performance when you go to a particular racetrack, whether it be a super speedway, intermediate, or short track. There's also a lot of room for error. So, these tracks, some of them may look similar, some of them may be the same length, but they are different from top to bottom. Not one track requires the same settings, the same setups, the same camber. So it's extremely involved, and you kind of have to not only understand what you need for the race ahead of you, but once you leave, let's say Phoenix this weekend, you can't go back to Phoenix with this same setup. It is going to evolve in a way that cars are going to be faster, teams are going to get smarter, things are going to get better aerodynamically. So you have to constantly figure out where you're missing things, even if you're winning races. So difficult task trying to keep up in motorsports in general. It's part of the sport. And again, it's ever evolving. I think that's one hard part about people having to keep up with rules and things like that is the series are constantly evolving. The teams are constantly evolving. Things are changing. So it's, part of the fun of it too.
All right, where Murph is perfectly segued into you asking the hard-hitting questions about what new downforce packages will mean for racing this weekend, the increased practice session, and all of that. So I'm going to let you put this in your own words to ask Murph the hardest questions that he's going to have to answer over the course of this fine interview.
These are going to be really tough. Why don't you first just discuss what downforce is and why it's important to the handling of a race car?
Well, downforce is just how much pressure is pushing down on the car, on the overbody or the underbody now. It's how much it's sucking it down. So it's really just how, how much force is being applied on the tires when it comes to the aerodynamic side. It's super important. These cars, the speed we're running, it's one of the most important factors when it comes to producing race-winning race cars. Again, there's two types of downforce. There's the overbody side and the underbody side. And nowadays with this new next-gen platform, you have the underwing, which creates about 80% of the total downforce of the car. So just so much goes into body settings, body panel positioning, making sure each fitment is perfect so that it doesn't trip the air. Things as simple as just decal thickness can throw off the body in a certain way that
That's nuts.
That is nuts.
Yeah, it could hurt the performance of your car. So we are again working with thousandths of an inch. We can pass or fail by thousandths of an inch. So it's just kind of the way the sport has evolved. And you find big gains in small areas, and aerodynamics is one of those areas.
I'd be ripping the sticker off at the first pit stop. I mean, I'd be taking the whole wrap off and going, all right, this is slowing us down from an aero standpoint. You can hire guys like Worm to get out there with a black felt tip marker and draw the sponsorships wherever you needed to on the car if it was going to give you incremental speed to win races.
Yeah, well, just a real quick, a funny story. Obviously, NASCAR has caught on to this, but we used to carry chapstick in our pocket because if you could put that on certain parts of decal in certain areas around the race car, you could actually pick up downforce. So chapstick used to be quite the performance maker.
That's how Worm graduated high school with his Scantron test. He wasn't able to sit next to the smart kids and copy, so he just put that down the barcode. It was the only thing that allowed him to be the most successful Division III football player in the great state of Michigan.
Yeah, well, hey, you know what? I'll take it. They also use chapstick on the face of drivers because like when you're playing golf, if you put chapstick on the face of a driver, you'll hit the ball straight because the driver won't put any spin on the ball. It'll just slide. So if you ever, find yourself in a big money game, go ahead and just put a little chapstick on your driver. I think it's frowned upon.
Chapstick was so important.
Yeah, incredible. So I guess looking at this week, there's been a lot of discussion, at least in the NASCAR Twitter sphere, of a reduction in downforce and a reduction by 30%. And so what that means is in the corner, when you want to maximize your downforce, and the reason for that is you want the air to push down to add grip to the tires. Essentially, would it be friction? We're just increasing the amount of friction so the cars don't slide around as much and they can have more corner speed. So with this adjustment of a reduction by about 30%, how do you think that'll change the racing or the on-track product that NASCAR will, or what's the goal and what do you think will happen, if I could separate those two things?
Well, I think the goal for, first and foremost is to reduce aerodynamic dependency. And when I say that, that means, these cars create so much downforce that when you get behind another car and you experience dirty air or the loss of air on your car, you could lose upwards of 30% of your downforce by just trailing another car, which makes it extremely difficult for cars to pass each other. Even with the underbodies, the big mouths on these splitters, that as efficient as they are, you still get this loss of performance by following another car. So removing this dependency, you're removing the amount of downforce the car makes, removes how much it needs to make to perform well. With that, I think, the other thing that they want to do is probably make the cars a little more squirrely, a little bit more difficult to drive for the drivers. These next gen cars, they have so much downforce. They have such a wide contact patch with the tire, big brakes. They're just planted in the ground as if it's a go-kart going around, your local go-kart track. So, trying to make it a little bit more difficult, a little less dependent on aerodynamics, and 30% is a good amount. Is it enough? I don't know if that's the case.
It sounds like it's a step in the right direction, though.
Yes,
I think that this is something that drivers and fans have wanted to see. They want to see the cars get put back in the driver's hands. What they don't want is, we've kind of said this within the sport that, the more on throttle time you have in the corner, usually the worse the racing is. You want to have off throttle time in the corner to produce passing. That way, it's more important that the car is handling better for what the driver is looking for, and that way you can actually make passes. And I think that's what the goal is. So I'm excited to see, NASCAR kind of take those steps to kind of promote that type of racing because, when you look at last week at Vegas, there's a lot of people that thought that was a very boring race because there wasn't a ton of passing.
I'm raising my hand right now, despite it being extremely profitable for us. I was bored to tears by that race once the 5 and the 24 got to clean air.
But one thing we did see is we saw the two best cars get first and second. And I, as a NASCAR fan, I like to see good, fast cars that you guys build in the shop get rewarded. And when all the cars are very similar, you don't see that as much. You see more kind of aero dependency and more drafting, and it's kind of, it turns into like a mini super speedway. So what do you think will actually happen in the race with the temperature changes? And by the way, Do you think we'll see much of a difference in the way that these cars handle? Because, I mean, it's been cold. I mean, even the Clash was cold. It was at night. Then you go to Fontana, it was snowing. You go to Vegas, it was 57 and windy there. That's why Todd was on his couch.
I'm soft. There's no way I was getting off my couch for that race. Absolutely not. 30-mile-an-hour winds, 55-degree weather, zero chance I was driving to Las Vegas Motor Speedway to watch that. No.
So
chance.
it's going to be 80. And so we'll see a little bit more slipping and sliding around anyway. What are your expectations for kind of the race with the temperature and this reduction in downforce?
Man, again, I am just looking for cars that are able to pass other cars. I don't think the cars are going to be that much more difficult to pass. They still, again, have a wide contact patch on these tires. Just removing that aero dependency. I don't think it's going to be a miracle fix. I definitely think it's going to be more drastic at maybe these faster short tracks, but places like Martinsville, maybe even Richmond, I'm not so sure it's going to change the racing product like maybe some are hoping. But
Bristol, maybe?
Well, they're not running it at Bristol.
Oh, they're not running it at Bristol.
No,
yeah,
Bristol,
not running it at Bristol and Dover because of the high banking from everything that I've read.
Yes, correct. So
look at that, Worm. I'm teaching you something, buddy. See?
Yeah, let me write this down.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a first for everything, wise ass.
So yeah, I mean, again, an amazing step in the right direction. It's a decent jump. I think that again, when it comes to the teams looking for downforce, the goal is the same. It's not like with the 2019 package where you kind of had to claw tooth and nail for efficient downforce so that you weren't dumping too much drag on the car. The goal is similar: max downforce. Go out and find as much performance as you can. So, overall, I just don't think that it's going to shuffle up the pack too much. I think the momentum that's on team side right now will probably carry on for a little while until things shake out. But again, with the loss of downforce, I think the tire wear is still going to be very similar, where you're not going to have those high speeds in the corner where a lot of load and a lot of speed puts a lot of heat and wear in tires, as well as slipping and sliding. So I think some of that's just going to shake out and kind of be a draw. But yeah, again, a great step in the right direction. But man, I'm really looking. I'm looking forward to Phoenix, man, because we've struggled a little bit this year, and this is one of our places. So yeah. I'm just hoping it doesn't shake things up too much out of our hands.
I was going to say, sounds like there's a little bit of skepticism in there. We're obviously not going to get the full breakdown of your quartet of drivers by any stretch of the imagination for Phoenix. I know Worm and I are going to hit on that a little bit later in the show as we look at some of the odds and the expectations that we have. But obviously hearing you guys talk about downforce and the change in racing that we're anticipating this weekend, so much of the dialogue, at least through the first two races, we can throw out Daytona. We know it's a super speedway and it's not indicative of what we're going to see going forward, is all about certain manufacturers being ahead of others. Murph, you're in and around the sport. Is it more about the individual teams or is it manufacturers? And I guess the logical follow-up, and I can kind of weave this all together, as we get deeper into the second year of the next gen car, do we see a separation between the haves and have-nots? Because teams with resources obviously can spend extra time figuring out, even if it's a narrow box that they're working in, how to maximize their advantage versus teams with less resources.
Well, there's a couple things there. First of all, I think just naturally when you add in a new platform that has been as big as the next gen car, I think you're going to see a ton of parity just out of the box as teams have to figure out this new car. And as time goes on, that level of parity is definitely going to shrink as teams, whether it be highly funded or highly resourced, figure it out, or if certain drivers just kind of tackle this car and kind of find their own. With that said, this next gen car does require a lot more manufacturer participation with the teams, where all of the wind tunnel time and testing goes through the manufacturer. So we are no longer allowed to test as a team. With that, we're also reduced to only 100 CFD runs per month, where in the past, a lot of that was unlimited. So, manufacturers work very, very well with their teams now. They kind of have to maximize all these hours, maximize all these runs to figure out and find performance in ways that they never had. With that said, it takes good people. It takes good resources, and it takes a lot of luck in many ways. Kyle Busch kind of commented last week about how his time at Gibbs the last couple of years just didn't feel like the cars were maybe, I'm not quoting, but weren't maybe set up for his style or what he was asking for. And finding that timing of a particular team's campaign in finding performance and how they find performance, and timing that with the driver, the way he drives at that particular time, his personality behind the wheel is so difficult. And you can't just have one or the other to win cup races. You have to have both to be a dominant team. So it takes so much to create consistent race winning speed. And one of those things is just hitting timing and a little luck. And, it's tough.
Yeah, it seems like there's such thin margins for error, as obviously the elite drivers and the separation between some of the highest profile teams has clearly been bridged than what we've grown accustomed to in previous iterations of NASCAR from a rules package standpoint and everything else. I mean, Wormser, I've asked Murph a lot of the hard-hitting questions I have. I wasn't sure if there was any other ground you wanted to cover before I have one really difficult question for him that I'm going to ask as we close up this interview.
No, I think it's just a comment. He's talking about thousandths of an inch or even millimeters where these cars are examined. And I think it just kind of speaks to the competitiveness of the sport. I mean, when you go to the track, and I love taking people to a race for the first time, because when you're there, you can't tell a car is any faster than the other. We're talking about, half a tenth a second a lap is a dominant car. After 10 laps, it's a second. After 20 laps, it's 2 seconds. And, you think about a tenth a second a lap, that's how tight and how competitive this sport is. So it is truly remarkable to see it kind of unfold at a track. So I highly recommend everyone that has a chance to go see a NASCAR race, or even if it's a hometown track. I know that local racing is huge in the South and out East, and dirt tracking out in California. So you go to a local track and just check it out, because it really is fun to watch. And I'm pretty sure that Todd's going to follow up here with a question that he has ready for you. So that's just my last comment. Again, Brian, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. And you've always been a good friend of the pod. So thank you.
Well, I mean, I think about it this way. I mean, when the three of us are in attendance for a Cup Series race, Stewart Haas Racing is now 1-0 with Kevin Harvick's win at Richmond.
True.
So, if it happens twice, it truly becomes a trend. And Worm, you may have to be on the team plane, flying around with everybody, making sure you can be the good luck charm. But the last thing I have for you, Murph, it's kind of an open-ended question. And we see the sport trying to take steps in the right direction, all sorts of initiatives to get fans in different geographic areas, socioeconomic, and a variety of other ways to fall in love with motorsport the way we have. We obviously use gambling as the primary vehicle for us. You came up being surrounded by motorsport in different capacity. If we make you NASCAR commissioner for a single day, what's the one thing that you'd like to see the sport really emphasize, or maybe even look to change going forward, not just for 2023, but for generations beyond?
Technology. That's easy. I think we see it in F1 a lot, the amount of ability there is to see the drivers and what they're doing behind the wheel, the times they're running. It's very open on the bits and pieces that make these cars go around the racetrack. And, I think sometimes the NASCAR scene is more, their head is just wrapped around the on-track product when it comes to the entertainment side and the show side. And, the behind the scenes in Cup Series is unlike anything people could imagine. I mean, even the media members that go to teams and go to the track every week, they only probably see about 10% of what happens behind the curtain. And again, the amount of technology we have, the amount of, tools, roamer arms, wind tunnels, CFD, the things we do with the cars we have is just incredible. And, I think we really need to start showcasing the technology we use and, all the tools and great things that most of the fans don't ever get to see, even on TV. It's the things you see on TV is just a small bit. It's a tip of the iceberg of the sport. And there's so many good storylines, so many good personalities to showcase, and that's what we need to do.
See, Worm, that is a big boy, adult, sophisticated answer. Instead of if I asked you the question, it'd be, tracks need better Wi-Fi, which we know exactly where Worm would be going with that. Because no doubt, Murph, this weekend when Worm goes to Phoenix, that'll be the number one complaint that I get from him, probably about 7 minutes after he gets to the track. He'll be there for the Xfinity race. His texts will go in and out. I'll be shopping for numbers for us to get down. And then on Sunday, he'll get pissed off at me like it's my fault that I don't get the messages instantaneously to make sure that we can save 5 to 10 cents on whatever drivers we're trying to add to our portfolio.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe some Wi-Fi wouldn't hurt either, I guess, right?
Yeah, see, I agree. That's part of technology. That falls under the technology umbrella that Brian talked about. I feel like we're in agreement here.
It's a giant umbrella. There's so much to do, but Murph, can't thank you enough for your time. We know how busy you are during this time of year when everything is cranked up. Your perspective, absolutely invaluable for our Stay Green audience, kind of peeling back the curtain on everything that goes into putting a race-winning car out there on the track each and every week, allowing us to bet on it and try and dissect some of the numbers there. Again, encourage people to follow Murph on Twitter. That's at Brian_Murphy_. And I'm going to butcher this. It's the Associate Shop Foreman for Stewart Haas Racing. That's the official title, right?
And you have a podcast too, right?
Yeah. And I was going to say, go ahead and plug the podcast. Thanks for the reminder, Worm.
We do a podcast every week, me and Derek Yoder, the All Things Go podcast, where we try to get some industry members from around motorsports in general. We've had an ex-F1 engineer on. We've had a couple NASCAR crew chiefs on. And we just try to, we've actually had a snowmobile racer that ran a 500-mile snowmobile race.
It was incredible.
500. Yeah. So
what an incredible finish to that race.
That's a level of insanity.
It was awesome
on a variety of fronts.
So we really try to hit, motorsports in general. Again, there's so many great personalities and stories out there, and I'm just trying to hear them all, which is impossible, but I'm going to give it a shot, right?
Hey, you guys do a great job with that. I know that podcast is continuing to grow. All the hard work that you and Derek have done, kind of bootstrapping that, getting that off the ground, leading into the NASCAR community that I know you contribute to quite a bit for the Spaces program that Derek runs on Wednesday nights that continues to grow. Encourage all of our Stay Green listeners to check that out as well. Murph, again, best of luck this weekend. I know you guys will welcome all of the team members back to the headquarters in Charlotte with open arms when you wrap up the West Coast swing officially after Phoenix on Sunday.
Yep. Long West Coast swing will be over. And even after Daytona, you kind of say, we're going to start the season. And really after the West Coast swing is when things kind of shake out and you kind of put your head down and start plugging away. So excited for Phoenix, usually a good track for us. Always a great track to watch on TV. And ready to get back east and hit it hard. But again, thanks guys for having me on. Always great chatting with you. Love chatting motorsports. If anybody's ever got any questions on Twitter, please let me know. Don't be afraid to ask. No dumb questions. And again, we'll talk to you guys another time.
Good luck this weekend.
Outstanding stuff from Murph. And Worm, the one thing, as we've gotten to know Murph a lot better over the last year plus, I mean, the guy lives for motorsport. If it's not NASCAR, whether it's the Xfinity, the trucks, or the Cup Series, I mean, he's watching IMSA, he's following F1. I mean, he's got motor oil coursing through his veins. That's the one thing
he said to me. He said, hey, if you're going to be the expert auto racing betting analyst, he's like, you better know more than just NASCAR. And it wasn't like if you think this is it was like, no, you have to do this. Like, if you're a race enthusiast, you need to start watching some of these other sports. So I know he's given me some invitations to not only check out the Lambo and the setup that he has there, which sounds amazing, but also I might have to take him up on some of this off-season stuff if we can go check out some local short tracks or some of the other racing that Brian's involved with.
Yeah. That's the whole thing. There's so much more to what goes on in motorsports, and obviously NASCAR becomes our bread and butter because it's the most readily accessible to try and bet. But obviously there are racing fans that tune into the show. We're trying to convert a lot of our sports bettors who have followed Bet the Board mainly for football content, basketball content over the years into being more sophisticated race bettors, but hopefully they also begin to develop a passion for motorsport in general. Look, Worm, I could save you trouble, though. You don't have to watch any F1 races. We know that Max Verstappen has a 98% chance to get a a podium finish unless he gets a DNF. So that's one sport we can save you the trouble until you get to go to Monaco and you get to be on your $300 million mega yacht watching that particular race. But all right, let's get into stage 3 and talk a little Phoenix International Raceway. We know it is your home track, a flat mile out there in Avondale, Arizona. When you're looking here, we've raced in Phoenix 2 times a year, going all the way back to 2005. It's a 1-mile oval, short flat track, limited banking, if at all. There was a reconfiguration a few years back, which changed the dynamic for one prominent driver, as he hasn't been able to grab a checkered flag since. When you're looking at Sunday's race, stage length, 60. First stage break, lap 125 laps later, and then 127 laps, stage 3, as I can't even read my chicken scratch notes here. Obviously, before we get into the race specifics, the first question I have to ask, when you're handicapping Phoenix, what are some of the best track comps out there that we'll go to throughout the course of the season?
I think Gateway would be the closest track comp, and I'm basing that off of some of the comments from Kurt Busch as he was in the Xfinity Series booth last year talking about it races. Gateway races very similarly to Phoenix. Then I would say New Hampshire, and then maybe some Richmond. You're going to see some of the same tire compounds. However, I don't know that you can go back and look at those track comps from last year with the changes to the car that we're having, this 30% reduction in downforce. I would say at this point, Phoenix is going to be a better barometer for those tracks moving forward than New Hampshire, Richmond, and Gateway actually providing any value to Phoenix at this point. I think it's one of those weeks where, hey, let's just let the week unfold and see if we can find some value after practice and qualifying.
No, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, we know after listening to Murph that there are a lot more unknowns this week than we typically get at other tracks. So when members of prominent race teams are saying that, obviously it provides some challenges for us as handicappers. When we look at previous winners here at Phoenix, Joey Logano, of course, won the championship race in 2022. Chase Briscoe won in the spring. Kyle Larson, fall 21. Martin Truex Jr. in the spring of 21. Chase Elliott in the fall of 2020. Joey Logano in the spring of 2020. Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch, and Kevin Harvick rounds that out way back in the spring of 2018. 7 of the last 8 Phoenix races saw the eventual race winner get a top 5 in the opening stage. Chase Briscoe finished second in stage 1 back in last year's spring race, while Joey Logano won the opening stage. And 7 of the last 9 race winners had a top 2 performance in stage 2. Briscoe was 8th in March, but Logano finished second in November. I present all of that data to go through some of the things that Murph highlighted. We look at testing. Christopher Bell, Ross Chastain, Eric Jones, Brad Keselowski, Joey Logano, and Ricky Stenhouse were all here, but it didn't sound like any of those race teams or drivers that had the privilege of testing this new low downforce package had the utmost level of optimism or thought they were going to be able to provide a competitive advantage when cars unloaded this weekend. We're going to get a 50-minute practice session, which I think will be pretty telling. So when you have all of those unknowns, does it temper some of your expectations in terms of your pre-week exposure going into Phoenix on Sunday?
Yeah, for sure it does. And I think that anyone that maybe reads in too much about the Bell, Chastain, Jones, Keselowski, Logano, and Stenhouse actually testing this package. I know that the package is slightly different than what they tested, but also it's going to be like 30 degrees warmer. I think for the first time, we're going to see a hot, slick track. We haven't seen it in Fontana. We didn't see it in Las Vegas. And that's why I think that, those cars that were hooked up on the bottom, those Hendrick Motorsports cars last week, that was the fastest way around. I think that the hotter, the slicker the track, guys are going to be searching for grip. They weren't able to do that as much during the testing, which was, I believe, probably like 45 days ago or something like that. So it was not as warm. We've had a super, super cold winter. So this is the first day that we're going to see in the 80s will be Sunday. So I think you're going to, don't read too much into the fact that those guys have actually had some on-track testing, because you throw 36 cars on the track and you ratchet up that temperature, you're going to get completely different racing.
Well, I can tell you odds makers aren't exactly clear in terms of who should be the driver to beat this weekend, because depending on the shop, when you look around the betting market, 10 to 12 drivers widely priced as low as 8 to 1, upwards of 12 to 1, and they're all the most prominent names in the sport. No, this isn't a super speedway, but as far as odds makers are concerned, they don't want to create any numerical advantage, at least until they have their heads wrapped around the kind of racing that they'll expect. The one thing that we could take away from last year was that Ford flat out dominated Phoenix a season ago. Ford drivers drivers led 89%, 558 of 624 laps that were run here in 2022, including 248 of the 312 in the spring race and 310 of the 312 in the fall installment. Team Penske obviously disappointed with how they performed last week in Las Vegas. Qualifying was great. We saw Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano go off as co-favorites at some of the most prominent books, but they drop like rocks through the field. When you look at these two drivers going into this weekend, Joey Logano went off at 4-1 in the fall. We knew that because he was one of the championship four. Ryan Blaney goes off at 16-1. Both of these drivers now priced at 8-1 this weekend and I don't even know what the hell the sponsor is for this race, and quite frankly don't care.
Well, I would say, the pricing for the championship race, you have to, take with a grain of salt because, Ryan Blaney was the fastest car in the fall. I don't even think it was close. And I think that he just did his teammate a huge favor and basically was the one car buffer between Joey Logano and, the contender and Ross Chastain trying to make that pass. Not one car passed Ryan Blaney last year in the fall. Not one. I mean, he passed everybody. And once, he was leading by, I would say, 3 or 4 seconds when that final caution came out. Joey wins the race off pit road. Ryan Blaney just went out there and just blocked for his teammate. And I think that's, I don't even think it was team orders, but it was like one of those things where, he knew what he had to do. So
Yeah, it was very F1. Very F1 as they take shots at that sport multiple times over the course of this fine podcast.
I do think that if all things kind of remain the same and the reduction in downforce kind of is, systematic across all of these teams, which it should be, and you're just looking at just the handling's gone away by 30% and it doesn't change much else, I still expect these two guys to be very fast. Ryan Blaney, if you look at his 8-1 price, I mean, I'm not getting involved at that price right now, but I could see him unloading very fast in practice and qualifying well, and then being a 6-1 car where I would absolutely back him at 6-1 if he looks good in practice and qualifying. The body of work that he put together last year, he was the best car in the spring, made a mistake, had to go to the rear, and then, basically let his teammate win the race in the championship last year. So I am a little bit more bullish on Blaney than I am Logano. I'm not going to put too much emphasis on what we saw last week. I think that was a little bit of an anomaly, but if it happens again, I will make note and, kind of prepare myself for future races when these two guys open it as co-favorites.
Well, I mean, we can't ignore their third teammate, who was actually the top performing member of the Penske stable last weekend in Las Vegas, and actually the top finishing Ford overall, that, of course, being Austin Cindric, who sees himself at a long shot price tag this weekend. He was 11th in the fall race, coming off of a top 10 finish last week, 3 straight top 2 results in the Xfinity Series, so he does have a little bit of track record of performing well at Phoenix, but I'm not sure he's going to factor into any of the calculation as a legitimate threat to win this weekend. Maybe crash the top 10 or a guy, if he unloads quickly, that you could isolate.
The one thing about Cindric is he does qualify well. So if you're interested in, just playing a number, I think, we've seen some 70-1s on him. He could qualify well and hold his own for a while. I don't see him finishing in the top 10, but I also didn't see him finishing in the top 10 last week, let alone being the top Ford. So, I mean, I thought that would have been, I think he was like 20-1 last week, and I wouldn't have touched him at 50-1. That's how strong I thought the other Penske cars were, let alone Kevin Harvick. So, that's why they run the race. And, Austin Cindric has yet to prove to me that he can go out there, and I know he won the Daytona 500 before I get a bunch of angry comments, but he hasn't proven that he can go out there and drive through the field after a poor qualifying. So I usually think that that's a great barometer as to where a driver is, and also how that marries up with the handling of the race car. Is he able to drive back through the field if he makes a mistake? I do not see the 2-car doing that quite yet in his career.
All right, from Team Penske then, let's go to Joe Gibbs Racing, who didn't lead a single lap at Phoenix last season. Toyota struggled quite a bit in both races. When we look at their stable of drivers, Denny Hamlin, 11 top 10 finishes in his last 14 starts in the desert, includes 5 top 5 finishes in his last 8 Phoenix trips. Christopher Bell, 9th in both Phoenix races in 2021. We know how well he performed at Loudon on a flat mile track, but you said the comps there, probably a little bit of a loose comparison and shouldn't be justifying any weight wagering decisions based off of that. Finished 26th and 10th last season in Phoenix. Martin Truex Jr. won the Phoenix race back in 2021, finished 35th and 15th respectively here a season ago, but he's been solid in the spring race historically, finishing 5th, 2nd, 32nd, 1st, and 35th. But the one thing that stood out to me, Worm, when I looked at JGR, and of course you can only do this in a vacuum knowing that these guys are going to be paired up with each other in a lot of head-to-head matchups, I'm stunned how much respect Christopher Bell is getting in the betting market now compared to his teammates, because yes, Christopher Bell is up and coming. He has shown a ton of promise, but I don't think he should consistently have shorter odds when we go to a lot of these tracks than Denny Hamlin, who has really been the model of consistency over the last 15
He just hasn't
races.
won races. That's the one thing that Chris Bell has done. Now, to kind of to steelman your side is they were usually strategy calls. I mean, he was coming with 4 fresh tires because he had to win these races. So they had to get super aggressive with their tire strategy, and it paid off. So I think that some of that recency bias of just seeing Chris Bell win races that he needed to win to advance in the playoffs has odds makers, keeping his price a little bit shorter. Am I backing him here over Denny Hamlin? Absolutely not. I think Denny Hamlin gets around this racetrack very, very well. And same with Martin Truex Jr. I can't quite put my finger on JGR and Toyota as a whole quite this year. Like, I never know who the best Toyota is going to be. I'm always kind of curious, going in. I know it's not going to be Ty Gibbs. But I just...
Hey, don't you cast aspersion. Ty Gibbs did at least enough for us.
We sent him out there to do one job,
weekend.
and he did it by one spot. So I will take it. But, I just think Toyota, they're off just a little bit. And I always take what Denny says on his, Actions Detrimental podcast. I always take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, when he's saying that, other manufacturers and other engines are a little stronger. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I think that when you take away some downforce and you put the race car more in the driver's hands, even if it's by a 30% margin, I do think you'll see guys like Denny Hamlin, Chris Bell, and Martin Truex Jr. get a little bit more out of their car than some of the other drivers that have run well earlier this season.
Oh, it makes sense. I mean, look, that's the luxury we have of betting NASCAR, is that even if these guys unload with rockets right now, I'm not sure that you're going to see Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., or Christopher Bell go off in that 5-1 range. That some of these prices will be out there, and I'm very curious to see what they look like in that extended practice session on Friday and the kind of adjustments that they'll make within that practice, knowing that if they don't unload correctly, they will be able to make some of those potential adjustments. Now, if JGR has been the model of inconsistency, at least through the last couple of races, what we've seen from HMS is they appear to be the team most tuned up and ready to roll right out of the gates. When you look at Kyle Larson, 3 top 5 finishes in the last 6 here, including being 7th and 1st respectively in 2021. 34th, though, and 9th last season, so it wasn't exactly great for him. As far as the outlook on the 24 and 48, the 24 of William Byron and the 48 of Alex Bowman, William Byron quietly 4 top 10s in his last 6 starts at Phoenix, but no top 5s in his last 10 Phoenix results. He's also never won back-to-back races in his short career. Meanwhile, Alex Bowman never even scored a top 10 finish in Phoenix races, despite this being his home track as a Tucson native. When you look at HMS as a whole, what are some of the realistic expectations you have for them, knowing that all the laps that weren't led by the Ford, they were led by HMS last year, 65 of the 66 essentially coming from Kyle Larson.
I mean, they were on it last week. That was Mr. H was flexing, that's for sure. I mean, they were the 5 and the 24 were way better than the rest of the field. And then to have the 48 kind of round out that top 3 was a very significant, I think, message to the rest of NASCAR. Like, hey, these cookie cutters, these 1.5 milers, we're going to own them this year. So now the one thing that will be different is it's not going to be 55 and cold. And, when it's cold like that, there's a lot more grip in the race car. And those Chevys could just hug the bottom. And there was not a lot of multiple groove racing last week. I actually think that Phoenix could start to widen out, especially if it gets warm. guys are going to start searching for grip, and then we'll find out what these Chevys have when it comes to handling of the race car. Now, I'm super high on Kyle Larson. He was arguably the best car at Fontana, even though we saw an abbreviated race from him. And then to see him follow that up with a pretty spectacular performance, almost a race-winning performance at Las Vegas, and his only competitors were teammates. So something is going on with Hendrick Motorsports that's definitely headed the right direction. And I anticipate Larson to probably be best, but Byron, if he qualifies well, he loves to stay up front and mix it up for the win. Bowman, he's a guy that can kind of qualify anywhere and still work his way through the field, at least better than Bowman. But I anticipate the 5 qualifying in the top 5 and kind of hanging around there all day.
If we stay in the Chevy camp, 2 other drivers worth considering, priced again, depending on which book, upwards of 11 or 12 to 1, as low as 10 to 1, would be Kyle Busch and Ross Chastain. Kyle enters Phoenix with 13 top 7 finishes, including 9 of them coming in the top 4 over his last 15 tries. 2018 and again in 2019, he was first or second in both of those events. We've seen how well he can race at this particular track. Meanwhile, Ross Chastain finished second and third here respectively in his 2 Phoenix starts a year ago. The only thing that makes me somewhat leery is the fact that he was only 19th and 18th at Richmond and Loudon. So Phoenix, again, very good there, but on some of the loose comps, didn't exactly perform at his highest level.
Let's start with Kyle Busch. I mean, by the way, he can win anywhere. And obviously off to a good start. I know that if you look at last week at Vegas, he struggled in practice. And I thought, to be honest, I thought when I bet Kyle Larson over Kyle Busch, as practice was kind of kicking off, that I was going to beat the market by 50 or 60 cents, and I was wrong because Kyle just figured out a way to out-qualify Larson and kind of keep it in the top 10 all day, even though he looked terrible in practice. So I don't know if that's him just getting the best out of his car or if actually these RCR Chevys were just a tick or 2 off of the HMS Chevys. But obviously Kyle Busch can win. And also when it comes to Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson, if these guys qualify well and look good in practice, you will see them be the favorites almost every week. So if you can kind of steal a number on them earlier in the week, upwards of 10 to 1, I don't think that that's a bad idea. When it comes to the 8 car. Now, when you talk about Ross Chastain, I think where Ross Chastain has had his success at Phoenix is he's super aggressive on restarts. And we know that this is, an ongoing theme with this one car, but Phoenix offers a very interesting restart, not restart zone, but after you cross that start finish line, this is the widest track on earth and you can get 10 or 11 wide. And when you have an aggressive restarter like Ross Chastain, who understands that you have to make your ground up in the first 5 laps of a restart. Otherwise, it's really hard to make a pass. He's going to put even more emphasis on it. I think that's why we've seen him have so much success at this track, at least last year. So I do think Chastain will be around all weekend. Of course he will be, but I would look for him to make up most of those ground on restarts and then kind of hang on to a position. I don't know that his long run speed has been there, but certainly short run with his aggressive restarts.
Be interesting to see. I mean, when you look at Phoenix, not exactly a track known for ridiculous finishes or a lot of these things going into multiple green-white checkered overtimes and everything else that comes along with it. So we'll see if we get some sustained green flag runs late and the best cars can win out. But it doesn't mean you won't get a caution with 20 to go. And to your point, you can see a driver take an aggressive approach to go from 6th to 1st if he feels that he can drive down on the apron, take advantage of the dog leg, and look to put himself in a position to come from off the pace and win the race. From the favorites or the so-called favorites, when we look at that large group that we kind of broke down, you obviously can go into the value tier, and it's always weird to talk about Kevin Harvick as a value proposition. As we know, he earned the moniker King of the Desert, and he's been astounding in Phoenix. When you look at his track record here, nothing short of immaculate as he attempts to become just the 6th driver to win 10 or more races at a single track with a win this weekend. But the reality of it is, since they went through the reconfiguration at Phoenix International Raceway, Kevin Harvick has yet to grab the checkered flag. Last weekend in practice didn't show a ton of speed, but we know he gets the best out of his Haas number 4. When we look at Kevin Harvick and the way he's currently being priced, a guy worth exploring now or one that you'll have a quick trigger on if he starts to look like he's got a race winning ride.
I'll say the same thing about Kevin Harvick that I do every week. I think he'll look average to maybe slightly above average in practice. He'll qualify average and he'll race better. I mean, that's just the standard operating procedure for Rodney Childers and that 4 team. Listen, for one, I'm the king of the desert. Okay, Todd, let me just make that.
Oh, here we go. I think the connection's starting to break up. I'm going to finish this podcast entirely on my own. You're not even the king of your own household, whether you like to admit that or not.
Soon. But yeah, you know,
I hear that dinner bell ringing in the background.
He's just struggled with this new configuration, and yeah, he was on a streak there of. An amazing run. I do expect him to run well. I don't think that you need to jump at this 12-1 price yet. Listen, if Kevin Harvick looks good in practice and qualifying and he goes down to 6-1 and he says he has a race-winning car, he has a damn race-winning car, and you can go ahead and feel very comfortable betting him at 6-1 when he's at Phoenix and saying that. So I'd rather wait and see kind of what unfolds, just because we haven't seen Harvick qualify well. So I don't think we're missing out on a price if we hold off on this 12-1, at least at this point in the season.
2 drivers that have started the season relatively so slow, one of them being Kevin Harvick's teammate Chase Briscoe, who won this race a year ago after leading 101 laps, was 4th last fall after leading 11 more laps, currently 32nd in points, and obviously wants a strong result on Sunday to build some momentum to close out the West Coast swing. And Tyler Reddick, when you look at how he raced here, had a 3rd place run last March, but other than that, nothing to write home about during his time at Phoenix. When you look at the current way that these 2 drivers are being priced, guys that are worth monitoring or drivers that you haven't seen enough from to lead you to believe they're capable of winning a race.
Okay, I am buying Tyler Reddick and I'm selling Chase Briscoe at this point. I do think that Reddick has the best value on the board, and I know that the 45 car did not have that much speed last year at this track, but I do think that this is, it's not as much as the car as it is the driver, and Reddick was really good here in the spring, and he was actually good in the fall until he had some issues. So I think that he can kind of, with this reduction in downforce, Reddick likes a loose race car. He's a dirt tracking background. I fully expect him to kind of beat expectations. He's kind of right around that 20-1 range. I think some places open him upwards of like 35-1, and he got bet down really, really quickly. So not only, Reddick historically qualifies well too. So I think, last week was just a really tough deal for that 45 team to not even get a chance to get out there and practice. He looked like he was shot out of a cannon the first 30 laps of the race, as fast as the leaders run in 15th. So I do think that even though they didn't get the finish that they wanted, he finished outside the top 10 there at Vegas. I do think that you have to take away some positive things from that race, just coming in completely with no practice and qualifying and still at least run some competitive lap times early on in the race. Chase Briscoe, I know he won this race last year and ran 4th in the fall, but he was way more competitive in those surrounding races. He was up front at Fontana earlier and, earlier in the season last year. Yep. And then same in Vegas. And so it wasn't shocking to see him kind of run in that top 5. And then with the way that the shifting went down, I think that's where he really set himself apart last year. And that's why he was able to win this race. I just have not seen the same speed and handling out of that race car to endorse a Briscoe play at this point. Now, if he does look good in practice and turns things around, that'd be great for Brian Murphy. But at this point, I don't think there's any reason to get involved with that 14 team.
No, it makes a ton of sense. You want to see a little bit of speed. I actually was talking to you before we saw odds hung earlier in the week, hoping that we got an astronomical price on Briscoe, but being priced much more like the driver that performed real well at this track, not once but twice a season ago, than the guy that we've seen really struggle out of the gates, along with, a lot of his other SHR teammates, one of which being Ryan Preece, who we'll see if he can put things together this week. But from that value tier, when you're looking at long shots, are there any drivers that you think are worth mentioning, or guys that you just want to keep your eye on that you feel provide, just an interesting storyline to follow before we see all the cars on track for the first time Friday afternoon?
I do think Tyler Reddick, is a little compelling. He's 25-1 on these Canby sites. The other guy might be Brad Keselowski. They've found a little bit more speed there at RFK. And, he's been very successful here at Phoenix when he has a fast car. So, he's the same price as Ryan Preece, and Ryan Preece has been out to lunch ever since the Clash. So I would say that Brad Keselowski and Tyler Reddick right now are just the two guys that I think could provide value if they unload, they unload decent on Friday. I don't even think they need to unload great, because I think they're drivers that can search for lines. It's a 50-minute practice, but these runs are going to be longer than 50 minutes in the race. So, when they go out and practice, they're not running for 50 minutes. They're doing 15 or 20 laps, and then they're making adjustments. So I want to know what's going to happen, 60 laps into a run. How wide is this groove going to get in 1 and 2 to where guys can maybe find some speed? And I think that both Reddick and Keselowski are talented enough to maybe pick up something. So I would keep your eye on them. But like I said, until we see practice, I'm not involved.
Hey, look, there's a lot of unknowns. Murph highlighted some of them. He kind of further cemented our overall thought process going in. I know you and I have picked off a couple of numbers just to kind of start building our portfolio, but more on rogue pricing that was out there, nothing substantial by any stretch of the imagination. So I think all of us will be glued to that practice session Friday afternoon, and encourage a lot of those folks that may be casual NASCAR fans or just starting to get the hang of it. If you happen to be around Friday or you want to DVR it, I know watching practice doesn't sound like the most stimulating activity, but you can learn quite a bit, hear what the drivers have to say. The one bit of advice that I would offer up: do not fall in love when you're looking at the scoring pylon for the driver that has the fastest lap. That's not exactly indicative of how those cars will perform, like Worm said, 60, 80, 100 laps into some of these longer runs that hopefully we'll see under green. You, of course, can follow Chris on Twitter. That's at Chris Wormy. I am Todd Furman. You can follow me there. That is your
Chris
Twitter handle, right? Or is there 15
yeah,
in there that I forgot?
Cool.
Chris Wormy 15. There you go. Eventually, you can be the Chris Wormy, and you'll drop the 15. So, but you've still got a little ways to go. Congratulations, though. You did break the century mark. No thanks to Derek.
I have 1,000 followers now, and that's...
Well, time for me to unfollow and a lot of our Stay Green listeners. So let's encourage them to do that.
There's only 133,000 follower difference between the two of us, so I'm proud of that.
Hey, you're getting there, buddy. It's not about quantity. Yeah. It's all about quality, and you'll offer better information on race day with your pre-race poll than I'll be able to offer up. When you look at the race, though, this is the final portion of the show, the best bet avenue that we like to go down, and we've talked about some of the uncertainty. We said people should temper their expectations with what we offer up on the show. I have to imagine we're going to find an awful lot of value, or at least I hope, in some of the head-to-head matchups on Sunday, as we'll look to glean things that odds makers may have missed. And of course, you can get those best bets on the Bet the Board website on that homepage. I'll always tweet it out and let you guys know if those have been posted. But in the meantime, if we're trying to put our bankroll to work for us, my friend, where are we going with the early week investment?
Man, I gotta go with my boy Rory Picks on this one. I think that Kyle Larson top 5 at plus 175 is a good bet. I think he'll qualify well. He's been super competitive here. He won the championship here 2 years ago. And I expect that 5 teams on it. Super fast at Fontana, super fast at Las Vegas. And I expect him to continue to have that same kind of speed and potentially win this race. So Kyle Larson, top 5 at plus 175 on all of the Canby sports books.
I would think looking around earlier, I think that price was widely available. So folks should be able to shop it and take full advantage of it to have a little bit of a pre-week investment on the 5, knowing that he should be very relevant in terms of the overall race profile come Sunday. All right, my good man, any final words of wisdom, parting shots, things you'd like to share, where people can meet you if they find themselves at Phoenix International Raceway this coming Sunday? Because I know you'll be there in attendance.
And we're actually going to get there a little earlier. Papa Joe and his wife, Jenny, they're going to go and bring their son Mojo. So definitely going to go there and actually do some tailgating and hang out. So just shoot me a DM if you want to, grab a beer and talk about the race. And I'll be doing the pre-race poll, I think, from there. If we can if the internet's good enough, I'll do the pre-race poll, which is just my pre-race show that I do every week, where I just kind of do a rundown of all the drivers and my expectations of the race. So definitely hit me up on social media. I'd love to hang out and talk racing. I memean, this is my full-time job and I love it. So I'd love to nerd out with anyone that wants to talk about it. So I'll be out there somewhere. I'm not quite sure where. So I'll keep you posted on Twitter.
Feel free to use the company credit card to buy anybody
perfect.
a drink that happens to go out there to say hello to you. You can just invoice it. We'll have accounts payable, get you taken care of, and get you whole after that. All right, we do what we can, but I just don't want to see 37 Coors Lights because you can buy beers for all of your buddies out there trackside. I'll let you foot the bill for that. But Phoenix should be a great race. We had a 2 mile at Fontana. We've seen a 1.5 mile at Las Vegas, and we get a mile flat track this weekend at Phoenix to wrap up the West Coast swing before we'll head to Atlanta next week. Excited about what we have planned for next week's show as well. Have a guest very prominent in the NASCAR space.
I'm excited for this one. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to him jumping into the fold with us. As always, use the hashtag #StayGreen if you have any questions, not picks related, but about the way we go through our process for Chris or myself. Tweet those at us. We'll try and incorporate them into the show. With an interview with Murph this week, we didn't have time to get to some of those, but hopefully we will in subsequent weeks. So for Chris Wormy, I'm Todd Furman. Best of luck with all of your race day investments from Phoenix International Raceway. And I actually did pull it up, Worm, because in case NASCAR folks are out there listening, it's the United Rentals Work United 500 is the race that you'll be attending on Sunday.
For the Canadian friends that'll be attending.
What's the quick lap count of that? 312?
Yeah, I do think it's that. Wow. Good job, Todd.
All right. Well, we do what we can from time to time. Most importantly, though, with a Kyle Larson top 5 ticket in hand, hopefully we'll see you at the window.